Well, if you've been following the channel for any length of time, you'll know that in addition to being a fan of gaming, I'm also an AV equipment enthusiast. And over the years, I have owned my fair share of AV equipment. And as you can see from the thumbnail, I have added to my main setup, and I've done something perhaps a little bit crazy. I've purchased a pair of Magnepan MMGi speakers for a system that is primarily used for TV viewing and gaming, and not so much for music. So if you're familiar with the hi-fi world, you'll know that Magnepan makes these planar magnetic speakers. They're basically panel speakers with all of the components that are traditionally sort of crammed into a box laid out on this panel. And they have a reputation, at least this particular pair, of being the best speakers that you can buy for under $1,000, but also a speaker that is primarily a musical speaker. This is something for a very, very serious, critical listener of music, or at least it's kind of the product that gets those types of listeners into the upper echelons of hi-fi. In fact, this speaker is marketed as being a kind of appetizer, so that you buy it, you fall in love with hi-fi, and you start purchasing the significantly more expensive models from Magnepan. But why would I buy it for gaming? Well, on the one hand, it's just out of curiosity, but on the other, I have always, throughout my life as a gamer, I've always been interested in making unique pairings between my gaming system and the AV equipment that I attach to it. This has really been something I've experimented with from my earliest days, when I would sort of sneak downstairs and hook up my Nintendo or my Sega Genesis to my parents' music hi-fi system, and I'd play for about an hour, and then they'd get angry, and I'd have to take all the wires out. I purchased, when I got my own boombox, I remember wiring up my gaming systems to it. As my parents weren't really enthusiasts, so to speak, but as they got another system, I would try to hook up my game systems to it. Did it at friends' houses. There was always something special about connecting your video game system to a good stereo. It really enhanced the experience. And as, we've moved into home theater and stuff like that, I still think there is charm, particularly with retro gaming, to using a good two-channel setup to play those retro games. I want to talk about how the Magnepan really works in that setting, but also give some more information on the speaker itself, because when I was considering buying it, I couldn't really find a good review online, or at least a review that went over everything. You'd have some demos, you'd have some sort of personal experiences, but I want to just kind of give an overview of the speaker, and we'll start by actually looking at it. So this is what the speakers look like. They're not that big. They're about, I would say, 48 inches high. And you can see here that they are indeed very thin. If you look down here, they have little feet that you can sort of lift to tilt the speaker forward. I find that they sound better if you use the feet and tilt the speaker forward. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but it is sort of towed in a little bit. And there's the other one. Same deal, towed in a little bit, about 4 feet from the wall. And this is why I purchased these speakers, because I had the room here in this loft to really push them out into the center of the room. Now I'm going to show you the backs here. These are the speaker wire inputs, and you can see those little threaded tops. You can kind of clamp down the speaker wire with an Allen key, so it can't be bi-wired or anything like that. That little metal bar If you pull that out, you can install an attenuator to kind of knock down the highs a little bit if you find them to be too bright. That is not the case with me. And there's the fuse. So hopefully this is useful to someone considering this and wondering what exactly, what do the backs of these look like. Now, finding the sweet spot for their placement in the room is a little bit difficult. You can see that they're pretty far apart, as I said, about 4 feet from the wall, and maybe 6, 7 feet here from the listening position. I'm really not filming this from the listening position, but they sit nicely on either side of the screen. And I can see the secondary screen there, which not the best visual here, is that my Windows computer, home theater computer, resets, but this they're very finicky, and this turned out to be the best position. I also, and I don't know if this is going to be visible or not, but I've inverted their position. If you see on the left-hand side of the speaker, there's like a band. You can see sort of these circular, almost holes in the center, and then a band to the left-hand side. Technically, those bands are supposed to be on the outside, but I switched the position because it just sounded better in this room. And if you can see that on this side. And I'm not using their center channel. I have my old Wharfdale center channel, which works pretty nicely with these speakers. The nice thing, too, is that you can kind of move them out of the way. I can push them back against the wall over there, and they are not sitting in the middle of the room. Nonetheless, you really do have to mark where they sound best, because they can be a little finicky to get into that position. And then what is absolutely mandatory and hard to see, there is the power amp that I'm using. It is an Emotiva A300 power amp, which is probably about the cheapest power amp that could still drive these things that I could find. It is 150 watts into 8 ohms, and I think 300 into 4 ohms. These are 4 ohm speakers, but they do, there is a bit of distortion, supposedly. Hard to hear. I haven't really played these incredibly loud, but that is a consideration. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. You need some serious power. You can't really plug it into an AV receiver. So there's the setup. What do they sound like? Well, I have to say I was incredibly impressed with how well these speakers do with gaming, particularly retro gaming. I would say from, Nintendo to Dreamcast, in that, I think, era that we all love. These are great 2-channel speakers for video games. And I was very surprised by that, because I did know that they were more for music. I was interested to see what they were like with home theater, but I figured, let me play some games on these speakers. And the gaming was what surprised me. So if you take something like Sonic the Hedgehog, the coin sound, one of the strengths of these speakers is that when you take a classical recording or a jazz recording, they are able to create this broad soundstage and really localize the instruments, in the room. So you could say, there's a saxophone, the piano's on the right-hand side, the horn player's on the left-hand side. And it does that with retro gaming. So if you say you're playing Sonic the Hedgehog, you run through one of the loops, you can actually hear the looped ring sound in the room moving from left to right, and very vivid, exploding and dissolving in space. Now, I'm not going to say that, when I say exploding in space, I'm not saying that they'll, blow you off your couch like the Sega CD commercials, but in other words, a very sharp, piercing sound localized in the room. And if you talk about, chiptune games and some early CD games, or sort of middle of that era CD games, they really have a lot of those elements where you can hear the individual, beeps and chirps of the chiptune games, through to some of the beautiful, Red Book audio recordings that you had with PC Engine, Saturn, and so forth. I mean, this does all of that stuff very nicely, and I'm using this big screen, and so, you're playing a game, I don't know, like Ease on it, and, you have this big screen in front of you, speakers to the side, and so the bold image and the sound, coming alive and dissolving in space is just a very, very unique experience. And so, I realize not everyone's going to use this for video games. This is a very kind of niche application. What does it sound like with other music? Well, or with, music, which is its, I think, bread and butter. Very, very good. It's that broad sound stage, and I'm not really a music guy, but I did find myself rediscovering some old recordings, and I'm not going to say that you're surrounded by the music, but it feels like you are, the sole person in a hall or in an audience, and you can kind of have that musical performance in front of you. And again, you're localizing the different instruments, you're localizing the voices in space, and that was something that I have never had with any other speaker that I've owned. Now, I realize that on YouTube, a lot of people actually like to hear the speakers, to give a little sound sample, but as we all know, that's not really accurate. You can't really get a true impression of the speakers, and certainly I don't have the equipment to even get close to that, plus the listener is constrained by whatever equipment they are listening on. But because I know some people like it, what I'll do is I'll just post another video. I do have some sound samples. They're not that great because the microphone I have is not that great. Plus, it was picking up a lot of the projector fan noise. And so I think that inhibits the sound a little bit. But you know what? I'll throw it up. I'll link to it below, and you can get an idea maybe of what these speakers sound like with gaming. All right, the pros of the Magnepan MMGi speakers. They really do provide a large soundstage, incredibly clear vocals, a great dynamic presentation of wind and string instruments. It is incredibly impressive. I keep on saying that, but I've never heard a speaker reproduce those kind of sounds as well. In the speakers that I've owned. Certainly, a $50,000 pair of speakers is going to do it a lot better, but for under $1,000, very impressed with that aspect of it. As I said in the video, it does create distinct locations of sound in space, meaning that you can almost see where the instruments are in the room, provided you have a good recording. It's a subtle effect. It's not like people are going to be like, oh, wow, there's a violin. But as you're sitting and really paying attention to the recording, all of that detail resolves in front of you. It is wonderful for classical jazz and then even techno and trance. Very good also for female vocals, really for all vocals. And as I said, it has excellent video game performance. The chiptune games up through the late 90s CD games benefit from this unique quality of the speaker to localize all of those sounds. And so all of those games from that era come alive in a way that I have not experienced before. It's much weaker for modern games, employing surround sound techniques, as I said. They don't have, it's just not a speaker for surround sound. But also, if a game is like, an indie game that is attempting a 5th or 6th generation sound aesthetic, they work very well. And, it's an involving speaker. It's engaging, but it's also very relaxing to listen to because it just seems like it's you and the music. That soundstage is there in front of you, and it's almost like you're enjoying a concert made just for you. It's very, very unique. And again, for under $1,000, I think it's pretty impressive. And now for the cons. And I do have a lot of cons for this speaker. First of all, it's expensive to get the right equipment to run these speakers. Now, I had already built out a system. I had the power amp, I had the subwoofer, and I had the receiver that had an amplifier pre-out. But if you don't have all of those things, you are talking about at least $2,000 to $3,000 to pick up that equipment before you even buy the speakers at, I think, $650 or $700 with tax. So that's a lot of money, and I think once you start getting into that realm, you're gonna be looking at perhaps other and different options. But if you have all of that stuff, then it becomes more of an interesting proposition. These are power hungry, so you're going to need strong amplification. I had an amp that was, it's the cheapest amp probably that you can get, Emotiva A300, cheapest amp that you can buy that will probably run these speakers sufficiently. At least that's what the dealer told me when I told him what amp I have. And they say that you want an amp that doubles its power from 8 into 4 ohms, and the amp that I have does it, although I have an amp that does that with some distortion. So the speakers can distort, supposedly, if you're blasting them. I haven't really noticed it because I'm not blasting the speakers. But it's really something to think about, and there are people out there who will buy amplification that costs, 2 or 3 times what the speaker costs. So something to consider. It is very finicky with room placement. You're going to be getting up and just tilting and twisting and shifting till you find yourself within the sweet spot. That's going to take some time. And once you do find the sweet spot, it may only be big enough for one person. Now, I don't live with anyone, so for me, it's fine. And I sort of moved over to the other side of the couch, and the speakers were still pleasurable to listen to, but I did notice that, the localization of the instruments wasn't as great. I mean, it was there, but it felt like I was literally sitting to the left of the stage as opposed to being right in the middle. So, these could be kind of a solitary listening experience if you listen to music with other people. They do require 4 feet of space behind them. They will extend out further into the room than other speakers. It could be an issue, depending on what your wife or girlfriend thinks of that. They have a weak low end, not a lot of bass. You will need a decent subwoofer. As I said earlier in the video, they do lack power. They lack the power and impact of, say, a traditional speaker. And as such, they're probably not the right choice for rock music or rap music, but, I could be wrong on that depending on what your tastes are or how you prefer to listen to those genres. The speakers can make poor recordings sound harsh. So I was listening to a fair amount of jazz and, old recordings where there is some distortion in the horn that really comes through on these speakers. If you have overly compressed music, it may not sound great. And taking it back to gaming, if you have some of like the early super compressed Sega CD soundtracks, not going to sound terrific. Not ideal for home theater. Again, it doesn't have that explosive punch that you want with home theater. Again, not great for television for those reasons. I find that when I'm watching television, most of that audio experience is coming out of the center channel, and the MMGis aren't doing much of anything. The break-in period seems to be rather long. It is about 100 hours. I don't even know if I've put 100 hours into them, but certainly they did improve significantly the more I played them. And while the speakers reward technical and focused listening, they may leave other people unimpressed. And, that's something that you have to weigh if you're spending, the $2,000 to $4,000 to get these speakers into your house and you enjoy them. You may have people sit down off access and say, well, that's kind of a waste of money. They sound like crap. You really do have to be in that sweet spot to enjoy these speakers. Now for my final verdict on the Magnepan MMGis. I listed a lot of cons. In fact, I listed more cons than pros, but I don't regret buying these speakers at all. I think if you're willing to accept them for what they are, you can deal with their requirements, and you have the equipment to run them, the MMGIs can offer an absolutely lovely listening experience. And you can see why music lovers really do appreciate the Magnepan sound. I think the MMGIs do exactly what they purport to do, and that's give you that appetizer, give you that taste of what big panel speakers can deliver. And when it comes to gaming, I really feel like these speakers are made for retro enthusiasts. Now, of course, they're most certainly not. Magnepan people there are music people. They are not designing these speakers for gamers. But I think because of their unique sonic properties, they make retro games and the soundtracks in those retro games come alive in ways that I have not heard before. I was trying to think. I kept on saying throughout this video, they localize sound in space. And maybe another way to put it is that you have these speakers on either side of the screen. But a lot of the music actually exists in the space in between these speakers. And within that, let's call it a bundle of air in between the speakers, you can actually hear where each of the sounds, where each of the instruments, or in the case of games, where each of the objects are. It's very, very unique, and I think that quality really works for retro games. So I've really enjoyed them, but I will stand by my statement that if you don't have the equipment and you say, oh, I'm going to invest $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 in a system, particularly a dual-purpose system, home theater, music, then I think at that point it's best to really do your research and maybe get a demo of a panel speaker and see what it offers versus a traditional tower speaker. Because I think if you get the Magnepans and you're not using them as they're intended to be used, and you really like rock, rap, home theater, modern games, then you're going to feel very constrained by them. But if you like classical, jazz, electronic music, vocals, and you like retro gaming, then I think they are a very, very unique product, and I certainly don't regret my purchase.